In an anxious, avoidant relationship, the deepest fight is not always about the text, the plan, the label, or the silence. Those are the visible topics. Underneath them, two nervous systems are usually fighting for two different kinds of safety. The anxious person is trying to prove the bond is real. The avoidant person is trying to prove they can still get out. They are not always looking for the exit because they want to leave. Sometimes they are looking for the exit so they can believe they are not trapped. That is why this dynamic can feel so impossible. One person says, "I need proof." The other body hears, "I am losing my exit." One person asks for reassurance because uncertainty feels like falling. The other creates distance because being needed feels like being locked in. So the anxious person reaches for clarity, and the avoidant person reaches for space. Both are trying to calm fear. Both think their move makes sense. But each person's survival move becomes the other person's danger signal. That is the core split. The anxious person needs to know the floor is solid. The avoidant person needs to know the door is not locked. The anxious person often feels safe when the relationship becomes clearer, closer, more consistent, and more named. The avoidant person often feels safe when the relationship stays flexible, less defined, less demanding, and easy to step back from. So what feels like safety to one person can feel like pressure to the other. What feels like freedom to one person can feel like abandonment to the other. This is why the same moment can create two completely different realities. The anxious person thinks, "If you love me, prove it by staying close." The avoidant person thinks, "If this is safe, prove it by not needing so much from me." And that is where the loop starts. You need proof. They need out. Not always out of the relationship completely, but out of the emotional corner their body thinks the relationship is becoming. If this kind of clarity helps your nervous system settle, subscribe. PsychBond is a daily decoder for psychology, relationships, and avoidant and anxious attachment patterns, so you stop guessing. Now let us go deeper, because this is where people usually misunderstand the whole dynamic. The anxious person is not usually asking for proof because they want to control someone. They ask because the bond does not feel stable enough to rest inside. A delayed reply can feel like danger. A vague answer can feel like the floor moved. A shift in tone can make the body start searching for what went wrong. When you have anxious attachment, uncertainty does not always feel like a normal unknown. It can feel like emotional exposure. It can feel like standing in a room where the lights keep flickering and nobody will tell you whether the power is going out. So proof becomes oxygen. A clear answer. A consistent pattern. A plan that actually happens. A message that does not feel dry. A repair after distance. A label that matches the intimacy. These things are not small to the anxious nervous system. They are evidence that the relationship is not about to disappear. Proof says, "I am not making this up." Proof says, "I am wanted here." Proof says, "The warmth was real." Proof says, "I can stop scanning for the drop." But for the avoidant nervous system, the same proof can feel like a trap forming around them. A label may feel like a lock. A request for consistency may feel like surveillance. A talk about the future may feel like losing choice. A need for reassurance may feel like emotional debt. The avoidant may not consciously think, "I want to hurt this person." More often, their body thinks, if I give too much proof, I may create expectations I cannot escape. That is why they can give just enough closeness to keep the bond alive, then resist the kind of clarity that would let the anxious person relax. They may want connection, but they fear the point where connection starts asking for responsibility. To the anxious person, proof is love becoming real. To the avoidant person, proof can feel like love becoming binding. That is why they often stay in the vague middle, close enough to enjoy the relationship, far enough to deny they are fully responsible for it, warm enough to feel connected, undefined enough to keep the exit visible. This is the first painful truth of the core split. Anxious safety often comes from certainty, while avoidant safety often comes from optionality. Certainty tells the anxious body, you can breathe. Optionality tells the avoidant body, you can breathe. And when two people need opposite conditions to breathe, the relationship becomes a place where relief for one can feel like threat to the other. This does not mean the anxious person is wrong for wanting proof. It also does not mean the avoidant person is evil for wanting space. It means both bodies are using old survival maps, and those maps point in opposite directions. The anxious map says, move closer before you are abandoned. The avoidant map says, move away before you are trapped. If nobody names that, both people start believing the other person is the problem. The anxious person sees distance and thinks, they do not care. The avoidant sees urgency and thinks, they are trying to control me. But underneath, both are reacting to fear. The anxious person fears being left alone with the uncertainty. The avoidant fears being pulled into a closeness they cannot manage without losing themselves. This is why a simple conversation can become so heavy. The anxious person may ask, where is this going? But the avoidant body may hear, give up your freedom. The anxious person may say, I need consistency. The avoidant body may hear, you are now responsible for my emotional state. The anxious person may say, I just need to know if you care. The avoidant body may hear, you are about to fail someone. The words are not the only thing being heard. Each nervous system is translating the words through its fear. That is why this dynamic often feels unfair to both people. The anxious person thinks, I am asking for basic safety. The avoidant thinks, I am being asked to surrender my space. And both can feel completely sincere. One of the clearest ways to understand this is through proof versus hope thinking. The anxious person often lives on hope until the pain gets too loud, then starts demanding proof. Hope says, maybe they do care. Maybe they are just overwhelmed. Maybe they will come closer when they feel safe. Maybe if I am patient, they will choose me. Hope keeps the anxious person attached during the unclear phase. But eventually, the body gets tired of living on maybe. So proof becomes urgent. The anxious person wants something solid enough to stop the nervous system from guessing. They want behavior that says, this is not just words, this is real. The avoidant person often does the opposite. They may offer moments that create hope, but avoid the proof that would make the connection undeniable. Why? Because proof has consequences. Proof means their closeness landed. Proof means the other person can expect something. Proof means the relationship has evidence. Proof means They can no longer hide behind, "I never said that," or "I did not know you felt that way." Proof removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is often where avoidance feels safest. To the avoidant, maybe is not always a lie. Sometimes maybe is a safety valve. It lets them enjoy the warmth of the bond without feeling like the door has been welded shut. So the anxious person waits for proof, while the avoidant protects the space where proof stays incomplete. That is how limbo is created. The anxious person has enough hope to stay, but not enough proof to rest. The avoidant has enough connection to feel wanted, but not enough commitment to feel trapped. Both people are getting a form of temporary relief, but neither person is getting real safety. The anxious person gets temporary relief when the avoidant comes close again. The avoidant gets temporary relief when nobody asks them to define what that closeness means. Then, the cycle repeats. Hope rises, proof is missing. Anxiety returns. Questions come. The avoidant feels pressure. Distance appears. Hope becomes pain again. This is why anxious avoidant relationships can feel like they are always almost becoming safe, almost clear, almost steady, almost chosen, almost enough. The word almost is what keeps the nervous system hooked. It is not nothing. If it were nothing, leaving would be easier. It is almost something, and almost something can keep a person waiting for a very long time. But almost does not calm the body. Almost keeps the anxious person in proof hunger. And proof hunger is exhausting because the nervous system does not want poetry, hints, potential, or mixed signals. It wants evidence. The avoidant may experience that evidence-seeking as pressure because every request for proof makes the bond feel less optional. That is where safety becomes a cage in their body. The anxious person is saying, "Can I stand here?" The avoidant hears, "Build a home." The anxious person is saying, "Can I trust you?" The avoidant hears, "Now you can hurt me." The anxious person is saying, "Is this real?" The avoidant hears, "Now there is no clean way out." This is the tragic translation error. One person's safety request becomes the other person's fear of entrapment. Another layer is that anxious safety usually needs presence, while avoidant safety often needs distance. Presence says, "Stay with me in the discomfort." Distance says, "Let me get back to myself before I disappear." Both can sound reasonable alone, but together, they can create a painful chase. The anxious person feels a shift and moves toward the avoidant with questions, emotion, or urgency. The avoidant feels that movement as pressure and steps back. The step back makes the anxious person feel abandoned, so they move closer. The closeness makes the avoidant feel swallowed, so they move farther away. That is why the fight can grow even when both people start with understandable needs. The anxious person does not only want words. They want the other person to stay emotionally present long enough for the body to stop panicking. The avoidant does not only want space. They want enough distance to feel like they still belong to themselves. The problem is that the anxious person's repair often requires the avoidant to stay in the exact emotional room the avoidant wants to exit. And the avoidance repair often requires the anxious person to tolerate the exact uncertainty that activates their fear. So, repair itself becomes a trigger. The anxious person says, "Talk to me so I know we are okay." The avoidant says, "Give me room so I can feel okay." The anxious person hears room as rejection. The avoidant hears talking as pressure. Both are trying to regulate, but their regulation strategies collide. This is why the relationship can become less about love and more about managing threat. Love may still be there. Care may still be there. Attraction may still be there. But the nervous systems are not experiencing the bond as safe at the same time. One person feels safe when the bond tightens. The other feels safe when the bond loosens. That is the core split. And if this split is not understood, people start making moral judgments. The anxious person gets called needy, intense, too much. The avoidant gets called cold, selfish, unavailable. Sometimes those behaviors are real and damaging, but labels alone do not explain the engine. The engine is that each person is trying to stop a different kind of pain. The anxious person is trying to stop the pain of uncertainty. The avoidant person is trying to stop the pain of obligation. The anxious person wants the bond to prove it will not disappear. The avoidant wants the bond to prove it will not consume them. The anxious person thinks safety means, "Please come closer." The avoidant thinks safety means, "Please do not close the door behind me." There is also a quiet humiliation in this split that people rarely name. The anxious person can feel ashamed for needing proof, because needing proof can make them feel needy, childish, or weak. The avoidant person can feel ashamed for needing out, because needing out can make them feel selfish, cold, or incapable of love. So both people hide the need that is driving them. The anxious person may dress proof up as a casual question. The avoidant may dress escape up as being busy, tired, overwhelmed, or not ready. Then neither person is speaking plainly. One person is saying, "I am just checking," when their body is saying, "Please show me I matter." The other person is saying, "I just need time," when their body is saying, "Please do not make this harder to leave." And when the words do not match the energy underneath, both nervous systems become more confused. That hidden layer is why the relationship feels so hard to read. The visible conversation is about timing, tone, space, plans, or labels. The real conversation is about whether love means safety or loss of self. And when the real conversation stays hidden, both people keep negotiating around the wrong thing. They keep trying to fix the surface while the nervous system is still reacting to the deeper threat underneath. This is also why anxious people often do not believe avoidance when they say they care. The anxious nervous system does not trust care that does not create proof. If someone cares, why are they vague? If someone misses you, why do they resist choosing you? If someone feels the connection, why do they still need an exit? Those questions make sense. For the anxious body, love that does not become consistency feels unfinished. It feels unsafe. It feels like being fed emotionally and starved structurally. But the avoidant may genuinely feel care while still resisting the structure that care would require. That is the part that hurts. Feeling is not always the issue. The issue is whether the person can tolerate what feeling asks of them. They may care in the moment. They may miss you when you are gone. They may feel tenderness when the pressure is low. But when care starts requiring clarity, consistency, repair, or commitment, their body may translate that into losing freedom. So the anxious person keeps looking for proof that the care is real, while the avoidant keeps looking for proof that the care will not become a demand. This is why the anxious person often feels like they are asking for the bare minimum, while the avoidant feels like they are being asked for too much. Both are measuring from different internal baselines. To the anxious person, a label may feel basic. To the avoidant, it may feel like a contract. To the anxious person, a planned call may feel kind. To the avoidant, it may feel like being scheduled into someone else's emotional rhythm. To the anxious person, a conversation after distance may feel necessary. To the avoidant, it may feel like being pulled into a place where they will disappoint someone. For the avoidant, a moment of spontaneous closeness where nobody mentions the future can feel like safety. But for the anxious person, that same moment may not be enough, because they know it might be gone tomorrow without a trace. The same behavior has two meanings. That is why explaining more does not always solve it. The anxious person may think, if I explain that I just need safety, they will understand. But sometimes the word safety itself is what scares the avoidant. Not because safety is bad, because safety may mean something different inside their body. To the anxious person, safety often means, I know where I stand. I can trust the pattern. I do not have to guess whether closeness will be punished by distance. To the avoidant person, safety may mean, I can leave without guilt. I can have space without being questioned. I can be close without being expected to stay close. I can choose contact without being locked into a role. When those definitions are not shared, the relationship becomes a translation problem. The anxious person offers closeness as safety. The avoidant experiences closeness as pressure. The avoidant offers distance as calm. The anxious person experiences distance as abandonment. Both people keep giving the other person the thing that regulates themselves, not the thing that regulates the bond. This is why it can feel like nobody is being loved correctly, even when both people are trying. The anxious person may try to love by being available, expressive, emotionally invested, and willing to work through everything. The avoidant may try to love by not making promises they are afraid to break, by taking space before they say something harsh, by keeping things light so the relationship does not become heavy. But those forms of love can injure each other if they never become conscious. Availability can feel like pressure. Space can feel like abandonment. Patience can become self-erasure. Independence can become emotional neglect. Good intentions do not automatically create safety. The nervous system does not only respond to intention, it responds to pattern. This is why proof matters so much to anxious attachment. The anxious body is not soothed by isolated warmth. It wants to know whether warmth repeats. It wants to know whether the person returns after conflict, explains distance, follows through, repairs rupture, and makes the relationship less confusing over time. The avoidant body may want the opposite kind of proof. It wants to know whether closeness still allows space. It wants to know whether needing alone time will be punished. It wants to know whether the relationship will still let them have privacy, autonomy, and a self outside the bond. Again, both are looking for proof. They are just looking for proof of different things. The anxious person needs proof of love. The avoidant person needs proof of freedom. And when love and freedom are treated like enemies, the relationship becomes a battlefield. The anxious person may think, if you need freedom, that means you do not love me enough. The avoidant may think, if you need proof, that means you do not trust me enough. But the truth is more complicated. The anxious person may need proof because trust has been injured by inconsistency. The avoidant may need freedom because closeness has been associated with losing themselves. Neither fear disappears just because the other person says, "Relax." Telling an anxious person to relax can feel like telling someone in a dark room to stop looking for the light. It does not solve the darkness. It just makes them feel alone inside it. And telling an avoidant person to just commit can feel like telling someone who fears being trapped to stop checking the door. It does not make the room feel safer. It only makes their body fight harder to escape. The anxious body cannot relax into uncertainty on command. The avoidant body cannot relax into emotional demand on command. That is why this split requires more than reassurance. It requires both people to understand the meaning their nervous system is attaching to the moment. Otherwise, the same cycle keeps repeating. The anxious person says, "I need proof." The avoidant says, "I need space." The anxious person hears, "You are not chosen." The avoidant hears, "You are not free." Then both people react to the wound, not the request. One of the most painful pieces is how hope keeps the anxious person waiting. Hope can be beautiful when it is connected to real movement, but in anxious attachment, hope can become the thing that keeps you loyal to potential instead of proof. You remember the good conversation. You remember the softness. You remember the moment they looked at you differently. You remember how real it felt when they finally opened up. And those moments become evidence in your mind, but not always evidence in the relationship. Hope says, that moment meant something. Proof asks, did that moment change anything? That is the difference. Hope is about what it felt like. Proof is about what happens next. Hope says, they care. Proof asks, can they show care consistently enough for my body to rest? Hope says, they came back. Proof asks, did they come back with more clarity or just more warmth? Hope says, they are scared. Proof asks, are they doing anything with that fear besides making me live inside it? This is where the anxious person has to be careful. Hope can make you compassionate, but it can also make you available for a pattern that never becomes safe. The avoidant may also live on hope, but in a different way. They may hope the relationship can stay good without becoming too defined. They may hope you will understand their need for space without needing more from them. They may hope the closeness can continue without the pressure increasing. They may hope they can keep access to the bond without fully entering the responsibility of it. They may hope they can keep the warmth without letting the relationship become something they have to protect. But when they keep the commitment too small, the anxious person is left freezing inside the uncertainty. So both people are hoping. The anxious person hopes the avoidant will choose them more clearly. The avoidant hopes the anxious person will stop needing proof so intensely. But hope without change becomes limbo. It lets both people stay attached to a future that nobody is actively building. This is why the relationship can feel emotionally alive, but structurally empty. There are feelings, but not enough stability. There is longing, but not enough repair. There is connection, but not enough ground. And the nervous system cannot live on emotional highlights forever. It eventually asks, can I stand here? That question is where the split becomes unavoidable. If the avoidant keeps needing out every time the anxious person needs proof, the bond cannot become safe for both people. It may stay intense, it may stay meaningful, it may stay hard to leave. But intensity is not safety. Meaning is not safety. Missing each other is not safety. Safety is what the relationship becomes when both people can bring their needs into the room without one person feeling erased and the other feeling trapped. This is the small, practical truth at the end. The anxious person cannot heal this split by collecting more hints and calling them proof. The avoidant person cannot heal it by keeping the exit open and calling it peace. If you are anxious, the question is not, how do I get them to prove it one more time? The deeper question is, does the pattern give my body enough evidence to rest? If you are avoidant, the question is not, how do I keep my freedom by staying vague? The deeper question is, can I experience closeness without treating someone's need for safety like a threat? That is where change begins. Not in one perfect conversation, not in one dramatic promise. In the repeated ability to make love and freedom stop competing. The anxious person needs to see that safety cannot come only from another person's proof. But the avoidant also needs to see that freedom cannot come from making someone else live without ground. A healthy bond does not require one person to stop needing safety or the other to stop needing space. It requires enough honesty that safety and space can both exist without becoming weapons. Until then, the anxious person will keep asking for proof, and the avoidant will keep looking for the way out. And the tragedy is that both may be trying to protect love while using strategies that make love feel unsafe. If this helped your body feel a little safer, liking this video helps it reach someone else who needs this clarity. Welcome to PsychBond. You're safe here.